Okay, so our second subject for discussion is a closer look at Exeter Chiefs Rugby Club. As we know, Exeter Chiefs introduced the Native American branding back in 1999 and have expanded on it since then. From the logo and the images to the naming of the bars, the mascot Big Chief, and the tomahawk chop. When you see this, how does it make you feel? And would you attend a match at Sandy Park?
I think when I see the mascot and hear the tomahawk chop and all of this, I guess I just try to. The biggest question to my mind is why. Like, why is that something that is so important to the team? What is it in their mind? What do they think that this helps with, and why do they think that that's at all acceptable? Where is it coming from? I think is what I would want to understand. So to me, it's just more baffling than anything else. I just don't understand why they would want to, why they want to do this. In terms of going to see a match, I think it depends on what decisions they make going forward. If they decide that they want to still keep being the Chiefs in the sense that it is right now with this mascot and everything else, then no, because they're telling me very clearly they don't have any value at all for my native identity or me. So why should I go?
I think it just goes back to what Chris was saying earlier. Again, you know, it's just the reoccurring theme of lacking any kind of respect for Native people. It's just a mockery. You know, there's no real. They're not even honoring actual Native people. They're honoring a fake idea of who Native people are. You know, the whole tomahawk chop, because we have the same issue here with the Kansas City Chiefs, where by where I live, and it's the same thing, the same excuses. We're honoring you. We're doing this tomahawk chop to, I suppose, honor your warriorhood and the spirit of everything that happened in the past, which is kind of ironic in itself because it's like we were like killing white people during colonization, you know. So it's kind of like they're taking upon themselves to honor this, you know, idea of a warrior or idea of who Native people are. And they always talk about these attributes of bravery, standing strong, you know, all these things. But when actual Native people stand strong and are brave in their voice to want this to stop, they turn around and say, be quiet, get over it, and shut your mouth. You know, and then that's the thing, is they don't want to acknowledge actual Native people. They're comfortable with the illusion of who we are, because if they acknowledge who we really are, then they would have to acknowledge the colonization. They would have to acknowledge what was done to us as a Native people. They would have to acknowledge we have the highest suicide rates in the country. They would have to acknowledge the land that was taken and the genocide that took place with Native people. You know, those are the real things that have impacted us in the past and up until today. So to them it's easier to identify with a fake imposter identity than it is with a real one, because with the imposter you don't have to acknowledge anything. You can just, it's like a toy, you can just do whatever you want with it, you know. And I see that as just a continuation of that same, you know, paternalistic kind of that white paternalism, like, well, we know what's best for you, this is an honor, so be quiet, you know. So
yeah, I mean, you know, it's certainly these cues as well that are kind of these social cues that are saturating society and, you know, acting as propaganda as far as upholding the stereotypical structures, and it really influences and acts to educate in some respects, how, not in a good way, but basically, it deforms who we are as people. It's informing how people perceive us. And I think Jimmy and Christopher and I were on another sort of conversation about this kind of the ignoble versus the noble savage, the fancy dress costumes of the Pocahontas versus the Disney princess. There's these kind of dichotomous relationships that are occurring, this kind of both fearsome and loathsome relationship towards Native peoples, and how they perceive us. And it's really, I guess for me, would I willingly put myself in a position of going to Sandy Park to a rugby match, to be exposed to that? I think at this point, it would actually be almost like a re-traumatization. Even seeing the videos online, for me, I've just been filled with horror in seeing the mockery of it all, and the denigration of us. And I am a living, live Indigenous woman, and to see some of those things occurring, it really just kind of slaps you in the face, really, with the colonialism of the I guess the hubris behind it is really kind of offensive to me. So I guess if it was a different scenario where we were attending a match and they were open to dialogue and to education and awareness around this issue, and open to changing this, it would be a different thing. But currently, as it stands now, I don't think I could put up with putting myself in that situation of going to a rugby match and having to be exposed to that.
I think it's very interesting to see, for me personally, the logo and the mascot, because I have feelings of not nostalgia, but but not in a good way. From someone who comes from a Cuban and also a Caribbean descent background, like being in Britain, I've seen the decline in the use of appropriation of cultural objects and icons, and the way that we as a country operate in regards to each other and our relationships, especially particularly with African descent, and just typically diasporas that are a minority in the country. And it's interesting to see that things have changed in that respect, but in a lot of ways haven't changed at all. It's no longer acceptable to have to own a gollywog. It's no longer acceptable to use blackface. It's no longer acceptable to run around, pretending you have a spear, wearing bones and painting up like you're a Zulu warrior. It's no longer acceptable to do those things. It hasn't been acceptable to do that for a long time. And I saw that change, and I've seen in people that change, that in my friends and stuff, about how we approach each other and the care and consideration in which we do it. And my question is why is this not extended to the other part of my culture? Why is this still acceptable for Native Americans, or from Indigenous people, from Turtle Island, and from our tribes? Why is that still acceptable when in other cases it wouldn't be? And it fills me with a kind of regret in a lot of ways, that I thought that things had somehow changed, because in actuality they haven't. It's just become this situation again of, we could get caught appropriating from people of color, of Caribbean descent or African descent or whatever. We can get caught, and we can have it can be serious repercussions from doing that. But okay, let's find somewhere else to do it, because I'm asking in particular, what exactly is so easy to access and so iconic about these logos and these mascots? Why is that choice for that? This stereotypical Indigenous head of someone from Turtle Island, of a Native American, or American Indian, as some people like to call us. What is it exactly that's so iconic, so great about that that in particular. When there's many other things, many nights, you know, there's you know, Vikings, from which many people and from Britain have lineage from. You know, there's Celtic, there's Gaelic. When I see it in some of my Welsh friends as well, you know, actually there is still this underlying element of appropriating and oppressing minorities of indigenous heritage. And so that leads me to think, well, no, I would not go and see Exeter Chiefs play, because for as long as that mascot and that logo exists, I would never be able to feel safe and feel respected within the confines of the playing grounds. I would just be filled with rage and ire, because I don't want to see that, really. And I don't think there's any difference from years way back, 30, 40 years back, where we had to watch minstrels dress up like people of African descent. You know, if I saw that on TV now, boy, you know, the whole country would be up in arms, as you can see clearly even now. So no, I wouldn't go and see a rugby match for as long as that logo still exists and that brand still exists for Exeter Chiefs.
I have 2 young children, and you know, who are born and raised in this country. You know, as a Native American, I am teaching them my Chickasaw culture to pass that on to them and giving them a connection. And so we talk about, you know, Native related issues quite a lot in our family and parts of my culture. So I think about, well, if I guess the question to me is, would I take my family? Would I take my children? And then they're saying, oh, well, who is that? Is this what we do as Native peoples as well? And it's like, no. And how to have those kind of conversations. I've been able to avoid that. So I wouldn't want to have to start it now, especially when they're that young. I'd rather them have to deal with it not at all. But if they do have to deal with it, then when they're much older and a bit more aware of the world and can understand and interpret what's going on and also right and wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, Tony, I want to thank you for that, because you do bring up a very important point, is our children. You know, we have to look at our native world and understand, as Indigenous peoples, we have the highest rate per capita of suicide amongst our native youth. And so, you know, one of the things that I embarked on when I took on practicing the hip hop culture and trying to spread the message and the culture of our people through hip hop music, one of the most important things I knew is how that was going to affect the self-esteem of our native youth. You know, because there has always been a call since I've grown up, you know, to do suicide prevention for native youth. And there's a lot of people who are engaged in that across the country. There are all kinds of social programs. There are people whose entire lives are dedicated to keeping native youth from killing themselves, essentially. And so we have to look at the harmful images and things that are portrayed, and the lack of representation and positive representation in the media. It seems like we're forever trapped in this scope of around the 1800s or contact era, you know, and in that we're not allowed to evolve as a people to be who we are today. And I don't mean by any means that we're evolved as in better. We're actually devolved in some sense, and that's why a lot of us are engaged in decolonization, because we want to get back to those original understandings of our people, that original culture that we had that was very pure, very good, very well-intentioned in every aspect of life and respecting earth and everything upon it. And so this call for our native youth is very important, because there are not many of us to begin with, but if we look at the negative imagery that's out there through those types of things, I couldn't imagine ever taking my daughter. I have a 15-year-old and I have an 11-year-old, and I can never imagine them taking them into a coliseum like that. And after everything that I've taught them about their culture my entire lives and told them how they are going to be continuing that on for the next 7 generations and how important that is for us as a people, I couldn't imagine subjecting them to those images and those things and those people in general that say that they're honoring us. And in fact, they're doing such a damaging thing, because this is a constant continuation of a cycle with the mascot issue. It's something that you keep having to repeat. It's something you keep having to say. And again, I think it was LeAndra that used the term re-traumatizing. And it is a constant re-traumatization. We're not allowed to go beyond this point. And even worse is these people are almost, how you would say, strategic in their efforts to maintain that imagery. It's almost as if it's purposeful, because you always have this thing where they'll pull out some Native person or some person with Native ancestry, or somebody who's even questionable about their Native ancestry, say, oh, I'm not offended by it. I don't have a problem with it. And that's fine. But once we understand colonization, we understand that there are people who suffer from Stockholm syndrome. There are people who will not feel any type of way because they just want acceptance. You know, there are people who just don't want to create waves. There are people who are so detached from their culture that they don't have the affinity for it that some of us have. And so it's easy to find somebody like that and grant them small favor. You know, one of the worst things that I saw during this whole course of the Washington team's thing is when they dragged out code talkers and brought them to the stadium. You know, that was totally exploitive in nature. And it was, but again, strategic. If anybody's ever played chess or anything else of that nature that requires strategy, you look at it, it's very strategic. So this isn't something that's happening accidentally. This is not something that's in that way. So if we have to look at that, we have to ask ourselves, what is the very intent behind that? And the very intent behind that is we are colonization's guilty conscience. Britain has to come to the terms that the problem with America, because it's easy to look, I'm sure in the UK, there's a lot of fingers being pointed at America and pointing out how idiotic we look right now. And I'm not from this place. I'm not a United States citizen. You know what I mean? I'm from my people. We are subject to an illegal occupation by an entity that just has more military might that we can't repel. That's the reality of it. Britain is the home of that. This is the descendancy of that. This is the legacy of the UK. And so when we look at that, there has to be people that come to terms with that understanding, that everything that we're subjected to is because of that. And there's a responsibility there. There's a means of undoing things. We have to look at campaigns. If you look at the campaigns that Hitler launched against Jewish people, you look at the propaganda and the pictures and the big noses and things of that nature. When you're allowed to dehumanize a people on that level, then it's easy to marginalize them to people that you want to affect in that way. We are the guilty conscience of America. As long as America is looked at by the rest of the world, we're the ones who can stand up and go, they don't abide by laws. They're not a lawful people. They've abrogated every treaty, which they're in their constitution says it's the supreme law of the land. I can't think of any terms that would explain it better. The supreme law of the land. And so these treaties were made with that understanding, and they've abrogated every single one. They violated every single one. Again, if you were to enter into a contract in this day and age, and you were to put a gun to somebody's head or kidnap their children and hold them at another place and say, until you sign away the city of Los Angeles, you can't have these back, or we will do the most amount of harm that we possibly can. Well, that's under duress. So every one of those treaties was signed under duress. There's no way, there's even business deals. If somebody has a drink of liquor and they sign a contract, they can go to court and have that entire contract undone. So if Canon buys Sony and there's liquor involved, you can go to court and say, you know what, I was under duress at that time. And it would nullify the entire contract. So when we look at these things and we look at the marginalization and we look at things like missing murdered Indigenous women and how that became an actual thing to where it is totally omitted that our women are disappeared at one of the largest rates, and there's not a lot of investigation behind it. There's not a lot of effort into it. It's basically our people looking for ourselves. We are constantly having this situation where these marginalizations are very, very damaging and continually damaging through generations. And it's something that we're having to continue to fight. And it's something that we have, and it really boils down to is we are trying to convince some of our people to actually live. And so when we look at these types of attitudes, it really is an attitude that we're dealing with of, I will do what I want, I'll use your imagery how I see fit, and we're having to argue for that. We're actually having to argue that. When it's known globally, like it's unacceptable globally to show up in blackface, right? Like people will lose their jobs, people will lose their careers. Like it's a universally accepted notion that blackface is bad, but red face isn't. So we have to ask ourselves, why is it when these games are being played that it's acceptable to show up in red face?
I'd just like to say I'm a massive rugby fan. I have a season ticket to Murrayfield for the Scotland games. Occasionally go to the Edinburgh matches as well, but I will not go and watch an Exeter game if they came up to Edinburgh. I find the behaviours of the fans and the imagery offensive, and I think, like LeAndra said, re-traumatizing. I think it really does have a visceral reaction. So you won't see me watching Exeter down in Sandy Park or in Murrayfield. It's horrifying. It's cringeworthy. It's just like what everyone's been saying about looking at old TV programs, you know, from the 60s and 70s in the UK that had unfortunate images of blackface or other along those lines, and it's just not acceptable anymore. And yeah, I just think it's we need to change this. And it's, yeah, why is it acceptable that blackface we definitely don't accept, and that it's okay to have war paint on and red face? It's a very interesting question. But yeah, you won't see me watching Exeter, sadly. I'm a big rugby fan. I love watching rugby, but I can't do it. It's too difficult with that going on around me. Literally, you know, being surrounded by fans doing those songs, those war cries, tomahawk dance, you know, whatever it is. No, it's a no from me.
So a lot of people have actually asked specifically about the headdress. One of the questions was, please can you explain a bit of history and the importance around the headdress, and how when sports fans use it, it detracts from the true meaning, and why it isn't appropriate to wear it as fancy dress?
Well, I think, you know, looking back and, you know, talking with my wife, who's a Assiniboine in Grovant, and her explaining the headdress, you know, all those feathers are earned. They were earned for certain things. And when people are making a mockery of that, I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with stolen valor. I mean, would you be okay with soldiers standing on, you know, a corner or somewhere wearing a fake Purple Heart and asking for money? You know, things like that. So it's a form of stolen valor. You know, in my opinion, it's a way to kind of use something in order to gain something else. And like I said, you know, these places, the imagery, the headdress imagery, it's just reaffirming the brand. And I think that, you know, as long as the headdress issue is still out there, yeah, to me, it's a form of, it's again, taking that identity and, you know, misappropriating it, misusing it for their own gain, right? So.
And if Exeter Chiefs asked you, how can we celebrate your culture? What could that look like, if anything, rather than the mascot and the headdresses and tomahawk chop? Is there an appropriate way of doing it?
Well, for one, they can stop doing the tomahawk chop, and the other one is, I mean, there's a lot of looted, you know, as far as like looted ceremonial items that have found their way overseas. You know, advocate for the return of those items, the repatriation of those items. You know, the same way with the way our identity has been looted to an extent. The same way that, you know, different archaeological digs have found, you know, pottery, sacred pipes, things like that, you know, back in the 1920s, and things found their way over in different museums in Europe. You know, why aren't they advocating for the return of those items to the indigenous people, you know, in North America and South America? You know, I mean, it's really easy to just sit there and throw on a headdress and eat nachos and guzzle beer and say, oh, I'm honoring you. But when it comes down to actually doing the real work, volunteering, advocating for land back, advocating for tribal sovereignty, repatriating items, actually trying to understand and read about the people, even going to those communities and understanding what's happening. You know, how many of these people who say they're honoring Native people have helped out with masks and protective gear because of COVID? You know, how many of these people who say they're honoring Native people have donated to impoverished Native communities so that they can be protected during this time and have the tools they need to make it through alive? You know, I haven't seen anybody doing anything substantial as far as honoring anyone, you know. And until you see that, it's just disingenuous, and you know, they're not truly honoring anyone. You know, it takes work to honor someone. Like Chris was saying, it takes, you know, you have to understand what it is they want. And a lot of Native people who want our identity to stop being a source of exploitation. One is land back, one is recognition of tribal sovereignty, another one is repatriation of items. Another one is bringing light to the missing and murdered Indigenous women. So there's all these issues that we face, but nobody's doing anything substantial to honor us on that level. They just throw on a headdress and say, oh, I'm honoring you. And, you know, I'm going to sit here and watch the game and, you know, drink my beer and, you know, eat French fries. But yeah, there's nothing honorable behind that. There's nothing, it's just laziness. You know, it's just an unwillingness to listen combined with laziness and cognitive dissonance all rolled into one, you know. So if anybody wants to do anything to honor Native people, they can come over here and they can volunteer. They can read a book, they can do all these things and get involved and advocate on behalf of Native people if they really want to honor Native people. So, and
there are other, well, I mean, I guess for me, there's a question. I'm grateful that they would want to honor us and help us, but where does that, I still kind of want to know where that comes from, why particularly us. But as Jimmy is saying, I think, you know, any kind of help, if they genuinely want to go, and there are ways of doing that. There are ways of, you know, working with tribal nations and saying, well, what kind of help do you need? I don't know, maybe giving a certain portion of proceeds or donations to help with nations, like, for example, in education or dealing with health and, you know, the pandemic, and or trying to raise awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women and other issues that are very important to Native people. So there's a way of, and also even education if they want to. So how, you know, again, working with Native peoples and Native nations, with saying, okay, well, how do we raise awareness around the influence of Britain on Native Americans, but also around the influence of Native Americans on Britain? I mean, going back into the history, we state visits, particularly colonial time when the British were trying to build relationships and, of course, pursuing their own ends. But there were state visits here. So trying to understand a bit more about that. I mean, I was just doing research recently around Chickasaws who had actually fought in the Jacobite Rebellion. No one knows about that, or very few do, but it's there. So we actually played a direct role in British history, continuing to affect Britain today. And we look at the fight for Scottish independence and debates going on there. So, you know, Native peoples had a role in that as well. So there are lots of opportunities, I think, to try to understand the history and the influence of Native peoples on Britain today. And there are also ways where the Exeter Chiefs as an organization can directly help with Native peoples. But again, they have to do it not in a way of saying, well, we're going to help by, but actually listening to Native peoples, listening to Native nations, and asking, how can we help? What can we do? And then working with them to do that.
Yeah, I would kind of echo, you know, similar things along with what Jimmy and Tony were saying. I mean, you know, even going back to that kind of headdress and, you know, appropriating our culture and you know, it's really that erasure of history and people attempting to pretend for a few hours, but not really having to ever grapple with the same realities that we've had to, as Jimmy mentioned, like high suicide rates, poverty, you know, the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Our women are being targeted, you know, and having to deal with the ongoing stigmatization of Native peoples. And it continues to really, you know, with the headdress as well, continues to place us in this historical context where we're you know, riding around on horses in buckskin, living in teepees, when, you know, as was mentioned previously, that isn't a reality for every single tribe throughout the United States or North America. And I guess, you know, it really kind of shows that position of privilege in that, you know, the rules don't apply to you. And, you know, when we think about our Native religions, you know, and our ceremonies being outlawed, or, you know, the boarding school trauma, intergenerational trauma, how that comes into play with and impacts us as people, and, you know, having our cultural identity stripped, you know, it just really is, you know, turning, you know, when you think about the headdress, I guess it's turning something that is sacred to us into something cheap. And, you know, along with honoring, if you really want to honor, I mean, I echo the same as what Jimmy was saying, you know, educate yourself on who we are as people. What was the colonial legacy that was established with Britain and Indigenous peoples, and really support Indigenous artists. You know, there are so many people misappropriating what they call inspired by natives, you know, artwork out there, jewelry. There's spiritual misappropriation, things, you know, these kind of new age hippie sweat lodge ceremonies that are popping up. You know, if you really want to honor us as Native people, I mean, come to us, ask to, you know, us, you know, look to you know, Google, as somebody said. There's loads of information out there, but, you know, there's a lot of avenues of and ways of honoring us that don't involve this re-victimization or this constant assault on us as people.
Yeah, I would say if you want to help, if you want to celebrate our culture, then you really need to be helping us celebrate our culture, because right now it's hard. There's many tribes out there who are federally recognized, and there's many who aren't federally recognized, and for a lot of tribes, it's a struggle just to even educate the youths, educate in an environment of our own culture. You know, being able to do that, getting back ownership of our language after everything with the boarding schools, you know, retracing our heritage, you know, like our tribe in particular, Mashpee 1.0, we had to translate a Bible just to be able to get some semblance of what our language used to look like, you know. So if you wanna celebrate our culture, you have to let us celebrate our culture first, and that is in, you know, in more than just words and imagery. That's about action. Like Jimmy said, you know, if someone's got cancer, you don't just post up pictures of them and or dress up like them. No, you give money, or you raise awareness, you help fight it. You know, that's what you do. You look for systems in which you can use to help that person who has been afflicted by through means of support. And then that's the best way to celebrate someone's life. You know, that someone's culture. You know, for, you know, like a birthday. When you celebrate someone's birthday, go to them and you let them know how much it is you appreciate them. You don't parade as them during their birthday. No, you go and you give them gifts, and you find out what it is they need. You find out how it is they're feeling. You find out what's plaguing them, and you celebrate their life as a birthday because you appreciate them being there. And if you want to talk about honoring and celebrating a people, you have to have that same approach. You have to ask us how it is we're doing. You have to ask us how is it's done. You have to say to us, we really value you. You have to make us feel like we're valued. You know, which is something that we don't really feel in this new Western world, this post-colonized world. You know, there isn't much value for us, and this is what it all boils down to. Again, with this mascot and this logo, there's no value in it. There's only value in it for the people who are using that, utilizing that for financial gain or for gravitas. You know, and it's about that. If you want to celebrate and you want to value someone, then you to do that. You have to put action behind that. You have to find ways of valuing it. So go and find education. Go and volunteer. Go to these charities. And when our tribes are having lengthy court cases, which are hefty procedures, you know, find how you can support. Find out how you can give money. And what you can do in order to educate yourself, in order to support us and sustain us in that way. If that's what you want to do, if you really want to celebrate our culture, you have to celebrate us, for sure.
Absolutely. I just want to thank Nick for those words right there. You know, to celebrate our culture, you have to celebrate us. I mean, one of the things we have to look at is when we look at historical change of mascots and names, one of the things I always bring up when these discussions come up is the fact that the NBA team for Washington used to be Washington Bullets. And after a certain period of time, there was a time in DC where young men of color were being killed nightly by gun violence. And the community found it offensive that the team's name was Bullets while their children were dying by those bullets. And so there became this serious discussion, and it became really imperative, and it was acknowledged that, yeah, we probably need to change the name of this team so it doesn't inflect such a tone. And the NBA did it rather fast. And so it seemed like almost overnight, it went from the Washington Bullets to the Washington Wizards. And guess what, guys? They survived it. They survived it. You know, they even Michael Jordan even played for them. Okay, greatest basketball player in the world, played for the Washington Wizards. So you can survive changing the name, and the Washington Wizards are testament to that. So that is one of the things that needs to start right away. Is like let's just change the name. You know, it's the 21st century. It's really a name change. People who have the gear now are not going to miss out because people who enjoy sports will buy the current gear. They've survived color scheme changes. They've survived logo adaptments. They've survived many things. Look at the Seattle Seahawks. Compared to when I grew up, the Seattle Seahawks looks like an entirely different team in uniform. And guess what? They survived it, you know? So this idea and this notion that things are set in stone and are, you know, impermeable and can't change, you know, has been proven wrong. You know, so the first thing first, when you want to talk about what you can do, you know, is change it. Change the name. Be bold, be brave, be an adult. You know, there's a time where you have to just look at it in any situation, in any relationship. If you've committed a wrong, the adult and mature thing to do is say, I didn't realize I was doing that. And I'm sorry, because that hurts you. And so let me rectify that. And that's the change behavior, because apology means nothing without change behavior. And that's what's required here, is change behavior, to say that, you know what, we're not only going to change the team's name, but we're going to invite Indigenous consultants in to figure out how we can help, you know, because we've done some harm. And so, you know, we'd like to, you know, and be able to sit there and understand it, because again, this process involves a humanization of our people. You know, that's why we're here today, is to put these faces and these struggles to a human perspective, because the reality is the majority, I mean, a lot of people only pick fights they can win, and that's why there's native mascots. You know, they know, you know, what we've been subjected to. They know what we've been through historically, and they know that, you know, there's people who believe we're extinct. There's people who believe that we're not around to argue, and that's why it's acceptable. You know, you look at a situation where Nick Cannon was making some statements in the media, and the minute it was deemed anti-Semitic, boom, Anti-Semitic League was right there. You know, and so when you have the population, you have the political power, you have the economic power, then there's a means of saying, okay, that's not acceptable. Change was created immediately. Nick Cannon no longer has a job. I'm not saying I agree one way or another on the subject. I know that's just the thing that's recent in news as of this week. So we need those types of changes to occur ASAP, you know, and not like, oh, we're going to begin the process of it. Like what we're doing with, you know, Washington and Dan Snyder, who was just literally, it took everything, a pandemic, Black Lives Matter, the death of Freddie Gray, everything happening all across the globe, all the global support against racism for Washington to even consider this happening. Had these circumstances not existed, that wouldn't have happened. Dan Snyder was not going to allow it. And so we have to look at the change with the chiefs here, the chieftains. You know, what is it going to take? What is it going to take? You know, and so we ask that these people understand and regain some sense of humanity and say we're no longer going to contribute to the genocide of Native people, because that's essentially what it is. When you make a mockery of a people's culture, you are considering, you are not contributing to the legacy of genocide. You are basically contributing to genocide. It's a continual process, and it's still happening. Native people die 40% more than any other people on the United States continent. And that's an actual traceable fact. So when we look at that situation, those circumstances and things of that nature, make a contribution in that sense, and let's start to figure out how to help other than that, other than just changing a name. Let's get past that point. Let's get into being proactive. I mean, you know, the Irish led by a really good example by making a major donation to the Choctaw during this time right now, when we had the pandemic being on set, and sending their donations that they did to the Choctaw Nation as they received donations from the Choctaw Nation during the potato famine. We have to build these reciprocal relationships of help and aid as a global community. And this is part of the things that can start that process. But again, it can't be a process that lasts another, 20, 15, 10, 5 years. It's something that needs to occur now.
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly on that, Christopher brings up a great point with regards to the Irish, that reciprocity of exchange. It really established a level playing field as far as establishing mutual respect between two different cultures. And I think that's really key to what we're trying to do here, is how can we open up that dialogue and create that mutual respect and understanding for each other. And let's change it. What are we waiting for? Why is it even taking this long? Why are we even debating this?